We're fast approaching the 2-year anniversary of legal marijuana in this country. The government has promised a 3-year review of the legalized market and how it's working. A group advocating for justice for racialized Canadians wants part of that review to focus on the impact that legal weed has had on racialized communities. For more on that now, I'm joined by Akwasi Owusu-Bempah. He's the Director of Research at Cannabis Amnesty and an Assistant Professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Toronto. Professor Owusu-Bempah joins us from Toronto. Hi there, good to see you as always.
Ashley, good evening. Nice to see you too.
So I would love to start off with this letter that the group that you're here representing wrote to the Prime Minister. And if you could dig a bit deeper into why you think it's so important that this review take into account not just, how it's working from a profit standpoint or an economic standpoint, but how it's affecting racialized communities in this country.
Sure. So, this government itself has recognized just how disproportionately impacted Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities were by cannabis prohibition. We have data from across the country showing that Black people and Indigenous people were overrepresented in cannabis possession arrests, literally from coast to coast, although we know that rates of use are relatively similar amongst those groups. And so we feel, and the time is right, the government has made since May and since the ongoing protests around anti-racism have taken place, made numerous commitments to tackle and to deal with racism and the legacy of racism in this country. And we feel that, the legacy of cannabis prohibition, and as we've moved into legalization, is a key cause that the government should be focusing on.
We have discussed the issue before in the lead up to legalize marijuana, in the aftermath of it. And one thing that you had often pointed out that really stuck with me is the issue around amnesty, right? And in particular, pardons and what kind of effect they can potentially have, because it is so disproportionate in the way that so much of these convictions and jail terms and things like that have been very much on the backs of racialized communities in this country. The government did sort of heed the message eventually. It took a while, but they did heed the message. My producer on this segment looked up the data, though, and it really jumped out at me. 257 pardons were granted in the first year of the program. The government estimated, though, that 10,000 Canadians were eligible for them. What is your take on how that has worked and where you would like to see improvements?
Yeah, so our campaign director has called those numbers in the program an abject failure. Clearly, 250 or so of the potential 10,000 eligible Canadians is a really insignificant number. We at Cannabis Amnesty recently partnered with the RCU group and their Can I Know platform to actually conduct a survey. Now, this was not a random survey, but an opportunity survey of Canadians' views around amnesty and their knowledge around the amnesty initiative for Bill C-93. And what we found was that a significant proportion of respondents, almost 80%, had no idea that this initiative was in place. And over 90% didn't know what the actual steps to receive a record suspension, as the legislation allows for, is. And so what we see very clearly is that there's simply a lack of knowledge among Canadians and a lack of awareness that this ability to clear criminal records for simple cannabis possession even exists. And so the government, first and foremost, should have done more in terms of advertising and promoting this initiative. And then secondly, probably should have made it easier for individuals to obtain those record suspensions. Although the process is expedited now and the fee has been waived, it's still a several-step process to go through. And, these are individuals who live often on the margins of our society, may have more difficulty navigating government bureaucracies.
I was going to ask sort of what you were saying led me to, what specifically might the government do right now that could make the program more accessible to more people who need it? Is it could an awareness campaign, something to that effect, make a bit of a difference?
So I think most definitely we need greater awareness. I would suggest, with the support of organizations like ours, the John Howard Society, for example, engages in this very type of work. If the government were to provide some resources to organizations and to groups that are able to, help people through this process, then that would be quite helpful, quite useful as well.
The review that the government is supposed to conduct, the one that you wrote the letter about, is not for basically another year, right? It's a 3-year review. We're 2 years into it. Are there concrete things as we look towards, for example, the throne speech coming up and an outline of the agenda that this government plans on pursuing? Are there concrete things that you would like to see before that review takes place?
Well, yes, and as a matter of fact, although it is a 3-year review, the review in some aspects is already underway. And so the Cannabis Act mandates that the government examine the impact of legalization on public health, especially as that relates to young people, on Indigenous communities, and in several other areas. And the wheels in that respect are already moving. And this is why, with respect to amnesty, we were a little late out of the gate in advocacy. And so this is why we think that it's important that we advocate for this, racial equity impact assessment now, before it is too late, before we get too far down the road of the 3-year review. So I would like to, as we've said, we're calling on and trying to apply a little bit of pressure to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health and others to initiate this. And we would like to see, some action in this respect forthcoming in the very near future.
Have you had any responses from the people you mentioned?
As of yet, as far as I know, we have not, no.
What is the cost of not studying the impact on racialized Canadians?
A continued legacy of racism in this country. We're having numerous discussions, of course, around the present-day racism and historical racism. Like, let's be clear. Cannabis is widely popular in this country, and it was before legalization. Individuals who have these criminal records, for example, still have difficulties obtaining work. They still have difficulties finishing their education, gaining meaningful employment, as I've said, housing, and participating fully in our society. And one of the ways in which they can't fully participate in our society, often, whether it be because of the criminal record or other blocked opportunities, is actually in the legal cannabis industry itself. So we know, based on research that I'm involved in and others, that cannabis is dominated by a white business class. That might not be surprising, but we at Cannabis Amnesty and many others feel that it's quite hurtful that the very people who were targeted by racialized law enforcement for cannabis-related crimes are systematically excluded from the cannabis industry itself. And we would like that. We know that this is the case, but we would like the government to recognize this. And this is part of what we would expect to come out of the assessment that we're asking for. Okay,
I'll leave it there. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time. As always, Professor, thanks for your insights this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.